If you guys have questions too, you can leave them in my comment box as well. Yo, sorry, I forgot to push the button to let you know. I
Oh,
thought it
no,
was
no,
automatic.
no, you're good. I was trying to figure it out too. I was just saying I haven't done one of these in forever.
Yeah, I was afraid that I was gonna start this and have no idea how to invite you, and then be like, I'm still figuring it out. So,
I think 4 years ago I did my very first live, and it was just a total crapshoot. We could not figure out how to get like people on, and it was a wreck. But this one I'm pretty smooth.
yeah, I mean, it's just two. I floated the idea of having a more than two. I do not trust myself for that. I got to start small, and then we'll build our way up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just realized the total flaw in our system with this Q&A thing is I can't look at the Q&As when I'm in this live. So we're gonna have to come up with some questions as we go.
Yeah, is there any way, like, if you had a laptop that you could access via your
So that's what I'm
laptop?
trying to do
Well, I mean, it'd be
right
kind of
now. I
like,
got my laptop here, and I got my old questions, but I don't have. It's not showing my new questions. Like it won't let me look at the thing that I got live right now. I'm gonna check one more time. Um,
okay,
and I got like
yeah.
I
Otherwise,
remembered a couple of them, but anything new, yeah, it says get the app, use the stickers. Like you got to go through. Bro, Instagram on a computer. I don't know if you've ever tried to use it, but it's not super fluid.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. So just to minimize lag time too, I mean, maybe people could just throw their questions in the comment. If you put a question before looking for an answer, maybe they can just throw it in the comment box. I think we can check it there too. So that way we don't have to, because otherwise I was going to say you could go, shut down, print out, screenshot the questions, come back while I tell jokes. But that probably isn't going to work very well. So I did see a few people like I'm looking through. I saw you had a Jochum, what's your thought on the future of Tommy athletics? So I can read these. So if people, I'll tell you what, maybe let's just do it that way. Whoever's here, if you had a question or want to ask one, that's awesome. Otherwise, we can just talk a little bit about basically like what we're going to be talking about in the seminar a little bit of a preview, things you've been working through lately, anything in there, anything in that realm. So looks like we got a few coming in.
Yeah, and then we
But
can probably start with the biggest question that I got, and I got this three times in the one that I remembered, is basically like, what's the difference between this and like kind of the CSCS model, the 3x10 like kind of seminars? Um, and at least for myself, it's ideally to be much more alive in the conference itself. And I know we
yeah,
we bump back and forth about how do we make it the best experience in that setting, and going back and forth, having the hour-long sessions, showing some of the movement stuff that we do. And I think that's kind of the whole premise of the conference in and of itself too, is like escaping the kind of philosophies that we're kind of stuck in. And that's kind of my whole premise of the conference for myself as I'm making these slides and kind of working on everything there. It's like it's not necessarily specific methods of how to do this. It's more so how to you, because my thought process is like there's so many coaches that are smarter than me, and if you can just get these coaches to like take a deep breath and like escape
hmm
the thing that they've trapped themselves in. And I think a lot of really smart people do that, because the chaos that is strength conditioning, the chaos that is the complexity that is the body, the human body. I think we do have to kind of simplify, and the smarter you get, the more you want to simplify, the more you want to make it robotic. And I think, and just from past experiences at
hmm
conferences, the biggest thing I feel like is just giving coaches the ability to breathe through some of our
yeah,
philosophies, and allowing their genius brains to take it wherever they take it. I think is a powerful part of the conference experience that I myself get a lot out of, and I feel like it's especially when the conversations are alive like that, and you realize these coaches are starting to shift over that philosophy. Man, that's where I feel like the magic comes in from a lot of these conferences.
yeah. I would say that's definitely not a point of emphasis at a lot of places. Is how can you take this and be creative with it? How can you take this and make art with it? And sports performance, it's funny because I remember my first two, one inter interning. Like it's been so long since I've been in that world. One in bad intern experience you might with sports performance, strength and conditioning, you might be like, it's a fluke, it's the coach, whatever. So for me, it was like my first one, I actually went from loving the idea of being a strength coach through whatever my own personal background and experience was, to being like, I don't really like this, but I don't know if I know why. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if that makes sense, but and I think it could have been different with a different coach, but it was the same thing the next intern experience I had. Like, why is this just not exciting to me? And I think it's because in my own self-education process, I learned to make everything alive. Like I talked with Mark McLaughlin about even like depth jumps. Hey, I got a tree in my backyard. Well, I'll do depth jumps and go jump and touch a tree. Like just things like that, creatively working with your environment where it's all, and it's also all driven directly and tied and integrated right to the output, jumping, dunking, and those things. And then you get in this container where it just seems so separate and everything is so prescribed. And I think it's important that I think some prescription is important. Like Rafe Kelly had a good he had a recent on his podcast was talking about like, well, like, is there like no rules? It would be like having a guitar and not knowing even the chords or the notes and just be like, here, have fun. You know, you need some chords and notes and you need musical like structure. And there's some great musicians who don't know musical theory, but you need some basics. But once you have those, an adequate amount, it then becomes about the art. You don't want to just play the same song over and over and over again that someone else wrote. And even if it's your own music, you're at a concert and you probably do little different improvisations each time. And so I think that that's that thing that ate at me about not really loving that the weight room in that sense for so long. And then there was this process of experimentally working in that aliveness that had a lot of ups and downs initially. But yeah, I think with the whole thing, it's like you respecting like a framework and then but then handing it off to the art and how can you make this alive with your group, and then the beautiful thing hearing how coaches, hey, I did this with my group and it was amazing. I love hearing that more than, I mean, that's almost what I love hearing more than anything. Hey, I learned this thing from you, here's what we did with this group, people set PRs, they loved it. And so I just think that's such an important piece of it, that
Well,
process.
that's something that is a big part of the thing that I'm working on presentation wise. I'm trying to put slides together of. It's like creativity is like built through the constraints. You know what I mean? It's like like you said, it can't just be completely like an empty room, and especially for a lot of coaches when it's new too, because I really believe creativity is it's a muscle that you have to build up and you have to flex. And for a lot of coaches, giving them the constraints to flex that muscle to start and then continually taking away those constraints so they can just work with the magic that is in front of them, with the athletes that are in front of them. I think that's a big part of that creativity process. It's like, how do you become more creative? It's like practice being more creative in these constraint-led ways.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to with the movement session too. Part of it is just giving them some constraints and then allowing the coaches to come up with creative movement solutions or movement problems even in those constraints, and then pulling them out of that and like, okay, how would you do this, or what would you do with your kind of session back home? Because it doesn't really matter what we do in
Yeah.
our session. I think that's one of the issues I have with some of the conferences I've been to. It's like, especially when I was in college, I would go to all the conferences and I would get all hyped up, and then I would leave the conference. I'm like, I'm never gonna do that with my guys. Like, either I don't have that piece of equipment, or it's just not gonna work with our environment. So I think that's a big piece too. It's like teaching them how to use that creativity tool through the constraint-led kind of approach, and letting them flex that muscle. And I think the muscle is honestly just taking a deep breath for a lot of coaches and showing them how to do that. And
Hmm.
then how would you apply this in your setting, and where does that work? And like you said, getting the text messages after that, that's when it's super fun. That's when it's like, dude, I came up with this variation of the game that you had, or this variation of the
Yeah.
movement that you had. I'm like, dude, that is way cooler than anything I could have
Hmm.
laid out for you. And all you have to do is just allow that muscle to flex.
Yeah. In fact, I wouldn't want people to, like, 1 year from now, be using the same prescriptions I laid out, the same exact
100%.
prescriptions. I would expect some sort of like little, trails and deviations and emphasis of different pieces of it all. And it's funny as you mentioned too. I do want to get to a few of these questions. You got a bunch of people like bagging on you with St. Thomas,
Are
by
you
the
seeing, bro? I'm
way.
not
That's
seeing any
like
more
all the
questions.
first.
What in the world? I'm missing
Oh, so
these.
if you scroll on the chat and you go all the way up, the first three are all about St. Thomas and why did St. Thomas can you, and what else do we
Bunch of
got here?
trolls.
How do I stop? Yeah, why did St. Thomas can you? Oh, maybe it's the same guy over and over. How do I stop being soft? So there was one on change of direction that would be good to talk about. Actually, I would love to talk about that on this call because I think that's almost like where prescription meets creativity in play in a really interesting way because a lot of people are split on that depending where you're at. But I was going to say too, I think a lot of I look at we talk about coaching and what sticks in coaching, what sticks in training. What sticks in training is the solution you found yourself through some level of exploration. And they may differ, maybe it was total free play, maybe it was a guided like play of experience of some sort, but rarely do things ever stick where it's like, hey, put your arm like this, make this exact decision when this player is right here, unless it's maybe a more constrained sport. Like I didn't play football, but I can see American football, more like chess pieces compared to, oh, you got a bug buddy. My 5-year-old son's out here. Oh, very cool, Ian. Um, so it's like, but I think that the things that stick the most, that are the ones that make the biggest imprint on you. There's something, an emotion connected, an aha moment, like you could say a Satori moment, or something that you explored, you put time into, and then one day, whoa, that's so cool. And you have all this behind that learning experience. I think that's how we learn so much of it in sport, but I think also that's how we learn as coaches. It's not just like when people go to seminars. I've seen this like people go, and I think FRC is fine. Like I did a cool podcast with Ian Markow and how he uses it. And I think, his adaptation, you can use it really well. But what I see a lot is people go to something like that, or, like a PRI type thing. And the exercises or drills, I should say, the prescriptions are in there for between 1 and 5 months, and then they kind of disappear. Now, I don't think that always happens. But I think the stickiest is when you don't just have the drills and prescriptions, you actually have the reason that they're there, and you have room to explore the corners of that thing, and that helps it creates this bigger, more powerful imprint on you. And so, when we talk about coaching and education, it's like if you can get carried away with philosophy too, but it's like, here's some reasoning behind this. Here's a constraint and framework. Let's explore this. Let's let this make an imprint on you so that when you go in your group or your own personal practice, because that's important too, it shows that you've spent time with the art form of this and you didn't just learn a bunch of drills from someplace and you try to coach everyone the same way. And we talk about that, there's an individualization, but there's also, I think there's greater themes that are also, they're important to help guide that individualization along the way, like knowing the notes on a guitar and the
Well,
chords and things like that.
and that was one of the things when I presented at the Emergence Movement Conference that I have really tried to expand on my thought process, because I was just kind of talking about it openly. I'm like, oh, I need to work on this thought process. But it's using that linear process of the reps, because I think one of the things that gets talked about with the alive movement problems is against doing things that are stationary or against doing things that are rep based. And one of the things that I've found is you almost have to do the linear process to get to that non-linear gain, those aha moments, like you said. And this is something I've been realizing with softball. It's I do a lot of T work, which is the least alive thing possible, but it's for the aha, it's this weird connection between this linear, boring model of things leading to this exponential, non-linear growth model, and trying to, I think at the Emergence Movement Conference, they were talking about the balance between the arts and the science. And I think that's really what they are talking about, and what we are trying to build out when we're talking about this is how do you have those exponential moments? And a lot of it comes from, again, those reps, but how do you get the reps in? You have to enjoy the reps, so you have to find a way to make it motivating and interesting in these movement problems that are live. So you're getting these reps in, but it's not necessarily for the reps itself. It's not that I did 200 swings today. It's not that I did 200 A skips today. It's one of those A skips, one of those swings off the tee, one of those alive movement problems led to that. Oh, for me, that was the eye-opening moment. For me, this is how I cut. For me, this is how I move. And once you get athletes to those, this is how it works for me, rather than saying, just putting them into these constraints, that's where I really find that magic. That's where it's oh man, this is they're figuring it out themselves. They are having these eye-opening moments themselves. And that's really what I try to get coaches to understand. And I'm working on that thought process myself of the best way to do that. But I really believe there is a balance there. Like you said, it's not throw out everything. And I think that's one of the things, I talk about the creativity side a lot, but it's not throw out everything over here. It's trying to find that middle ground and understanding why you need both sides of the puzzle to get to that point. Also, if I'm looking down, it's my feed is frozen, but it's live on my computer. So I'm looking at the questions on this computer rather than looking here. I don't know why it's frozen on my computer.
Yeah, I can give you some too, because I can see them fine, if that helps. One was, and I totally agree with you, but before I want to maybe cover COD, because I think that's this, to me, that's almost like a linchpin between, an ecological approach and a cognitive or a drill-oriented approach. But I do think it is interesting because I think if you get into the motor learning and the ecological, it's almost like you could get to the point where, oh, the repetition and the drills of the same thing, but it's mundane, it doesn't work, it's boring. But I mean, well, one, even within that drill, it's still variable, it's still naturally variable. But yeah, it's been similar to me. Like I know in my high jumping career, I remember one day my junior year, after who knows how many high jumps, and no one said this to me, no coach put in my ear. I just started jumping with more, putting up my right hand more in advance, and I don't know why I did it. I just started doing it. It felt really good, and I was like, "Wow, I just jumped a little higher, and it felt a little easier. I think I'm going to go with that." And you think about, well, what if a coach put that in my
Yes.
ear earlier? Like would it have been the same effect? And I think that's another art of coaching is you set these things up, be it a constraint that allows for play or something that is more rote. I mean, rote, I actually thought it'd be cool to get Brady Volmering on this call, who does, how many thousands of drops and repetitions he has done to get his idea of, okay, in the midst of the, 500th, 600th impulse, what came up for you? And it's kind of like meditation almost. It's like we live in this world of noise. And at what point do you have a little silence as an athlete? Like athletic silence is almost repetition in some way, shape, or form without the coach's input so that you can figure something out. And it's funny too, because I mean, as well as I, and not all athletes will treat, some athletes are get bored, and it's almost in some ways, some athletes are more driven to find that gold at the end of the tunnel than others, if that makes sense. And you want to like them put something in their head, or maybe they just need another series of movements that is a little more alive to them. But yeah, I've found a lot of things, even through just tempo sprints. I mean, something that's you could just bag on tempo and say, oh, 6x200 or 8x200, that's dumb, that's mundane. But I've discovered a lot of things through the course of that, and even subconsciously, just relaxing and the level of bounce and various things. And there's ways to make it more interesting for sure. But you look at like Jay Schrader's stuff, and the cool thing with Jay's stuff is it's all on a time cadence. It's like do one Russian lunge every 5 seconds. It's like boom, boom, boom. But again, you don't want to only do that. You need to at least some point get a constraint. But I think there's something powerful that can focus the mind when there's that particular amount of repetition that is also an empty cup, and to see what comes
Yeah,
up.
and again, that's why I think the philosophy behind it is so important. Like again, a coach like this is the biggest problem I see in our field. It's like a coach would see you succeed with that hand high, and then for a lot of coaches, their solution is tell
Hmm.
all athletes hand high, and
Yep,
that's
yep.
the
That's
issue.
what
Like
happens exactly.
it's not the hand high that is the solution. It's not the A skip. It's not the knees here. That's the solution. It's that was the solution to that individual athlete. And breaking out of the paradigm, breaking out of the systems that we've structured, and that's the goal of this conference, is to get you to a point to understand that that's what works specifically for that athlete at that time. And that's another thing that I've noticed with the thousands of reps is certain times for me, it's let's say it's softball, just because it's what I'm doing right now. It's hand high in the swing. And then there's months where it's not that's not the focus point. That focus point doesn't work for me. But I think a lot of coaches get
Hmm.
stuck into I got Joel to PR by a meter by just throwing his hand up, and why is it not
Hmm.
working for you? I'm just going to continue to press you through here, and that's where it's you have to have that balance in the movement practices of how can I get these athletes exposed to as many different movement solutions as many different times to see what works for them. Maybe it is
Hmm.
hands high consistently for you, but for another athlete, maybe it's not. And how can we find what works for them at that right time, at the right moment? And that's really where I feel like, again, that rep part, that the part that Brady talks about, where it's reps and reps and reps, and finding those moments for you with the alive movement problems to kind of give them different. Okay, let's try with the hand, like left hand high. Let's see how that was
Yeah.
trash. Okay, that's amazing. Like now we got a
Hmm.
bunch of noise and a bunch of bad stuff there. Let's try left leg high, like just weird stuff like that. And I really have found with a lot of the athletes, that's the moment that we're looking for. The individual, like Joel Smith, right hand high. Like we're looking for that for their individual sport and for their individual time where they're finding those things. And I think a lot of coaches, they just see one thing and they apply it to all things. And that's not the coach's fault. I think it's our system's fault. It's like we've
Yeah.
been taught over and over again. But again, I don't think we take or we respect enough of the individual athletes in front of us enough to be like, well, it could be just totally different, and which is silly because like I'm watching the NBA playoffs right now, and all of these athletes have different solutions, like all over the place.
Yeah.
You have the super tall guys, you have the
Yes.
super short guys, and they're solving these problems in the constraints of the game, but under their own creative and individual ways, right? And I think that's where we need to, again, that's where I think the deep breath is really important, to allow these athletes and expose these athletes to environments in which they can work on these things over and over again, so they themselves can have those aha moments. They themselves can have that, oh,
Hmm.
when I throw my right hand high, I jump higher type moments, and not getting stuck in our own systems. And that's the thing that I think we do. I think we trap ourselves. Like, nobody else is trapping us. The athletes aren't trapping us. The systems
Hmm.
are trapping us. It's, we want to be a good coach, and we've been told, or we've seen data points of having good results doing a certain thing for a certain number of athletes. But I think it leaves a lot of athletes and a lot of results on the table.
Yeah, yeah. Like Kid Boy Johnson talked about. He's been
Kid
on
Wade's
both
a
of our podcasts. We have
killer.
way less art. He's awesome, and we just have less artists. It's like it's almost like a hashtag. We like build artists. You know, I mean, the basketball brought up the way that it should be brought up through like a loads of free play and exploration does breed artistry, and I think maybe almost more in basketball in some ways than any other sport, just because like Bobby White talks about, there's more like ways you can play and succeed at basketball almost. I mean, maybe I need to experience more sports, but yeah, even in like an example based off what you said, like in high jump, I could, and I don't want to go with high jump too much because it's an example that's might be a little unfamiliar. I mean, it's single leg jumping high, but like there's a curve in high jump and you jump over a bar. And I've found I just had a breakthrough with a few athletes recently where I came up with a way to resist them on the curve from the side so they feel the lean. And they also, the resistance turns into kind of a resistance sprint, so they have to really push the stride length. So I get two things I want in one drill, but I don't have to say a thing. And it would be way, way better for me just to have them go through that drill dozens of times with limited input from me than me having them run the curve and just say a bunch of stuff. Because that's the usual way to do it. They run a curve, okay, do this better. Okay, do this better. You know, it's that didactic I say you do, like Kevin Mulcahy talked about in the recent podcast. So yeah, I think, and that's just the beauty of it. It's like when you know those little constraints that allow an athlete, it's like, it's almost like the seed. You know, these little constraints that are seeds that then you give them reps, that's the water, and then the athlete gets to flourish, and you're the coach for that container. And you can apply the same thing for speed. You know, everyone loves speed, acceleration, and all that. That's the most common language. And those are certainly a big thing as well. But then you can take that out to a variety of sports skills. You know, all the basic like spiking and swinging. But then I believe you could even take that into sport itself, coaching sport. And I think it's a general philosophy, and I think it works its way into sports performance. But I always feel like you also want to study sport. You know, you want to study skill, and it helps you because I think without sport and skill, it would be almost impossible to see these things.
Yeah, I mean, playing the sport too and doing some of
Hmm.
these things, I think is one of the I preach on this a lot, but it's like the amount of, like, this past weekend was the worst weekend of softball I've ever had, and like they had no like I was never thinking about a squat or never thinking about my speed training during
Hmm.
it. It's like individual skill aspects during it. Did you see the question of any core linchpins that don't appear to be antidote to you all?
That any why do you think Jochum is Trey Johnson is begging on you,
We
by
got
the
Trey, we
way?
got Proc, and we got Dowdle, all JST members in here are just going crazy, so we will ignore them. But it's part of the cult. But
uh,
Ubanek, I don't know how you say your name, but he said any core linchpins that don't appear to be anecdotal to y'all.
core linchpins that don't appear to be
Yeah,
anecdotal. Oh, I know what you're saying. Like things that aren't necessarily anecdotes, but just more speak from a, I guess, an academic or a general philosophical perspective.
I guess.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I know. You know, in some ways, anecdotes are the easiest way for me to put out that like general piece. I mean, same way. You know, I guess I, the same way I look at it is like those rote repetitions is a meditation. I think that's universal because you have silence and the answer will eventually appear, and you have to put in the time. And you also have to have like the correct space for that, the space to let the mind like interconnect and flourish there. So, but yeah, I mean, do you have anything there? Maybe I'll get my mind
Well,
going a little bit more on that.
I
Like, I mean, because I was,
yeah, I just like the container aspect that you just mentioned. That really has my brain thinking of your whole tree analogy we talked about on the last podcast. But the container is what we can provide as the coach, and that is the thing that I think we like. If you look at a tree or a fish are great examples too. If you put a fish in a really small fish tank, like they don't grow, right? And you put that same fish in a bigger fish tank, they're able to grow and get huge, right? And I think that is the number one role of us as a coach. What do? We provide that container. And I think most coaches, to me, provide a little like glass fish bowl for like a goldfish to grow in or a koi to grow in. We used to have a bunch of koi back home, and you put them in a pond. We built out a huge pond, and they grow like triple the size because they have room to play within the container of the sport or room to explore in the container of movement. And I think a lot of times that is the number one thing that I see coaches kind of mess up on is we unnecessarily create these small fish bowls and put our athletes in these small fish bowls of our systems. Like it's my system. It's this system is what, but it's like, man, why? Like, why are we doing that? Like, let the container, like,
Yeah.
keep that container large. Use all the tools that you have. And that's another thing that I talked about in the presentation. Is like seeing stimulus for stimulus. That's the big part of it. It's like use all of your tools, use all of your methods that you're able to have, so that container stays big, so the roots can expand, so the fish can get huge in that container. And I think once an athlete is exposed to this big fish tank, it's nerve wracking for them at first because they're looking for the safety of that small fish bowl, right? But that small fish bowl keeps them a small fish. They don't actually want that, right? You want to put them in the big fish
Hmm.
bowl. You want to put them in that big container. Let them be a little bit awkward at the first. Let them look for the guidance that they've always received right away at first. But then once you take that away and just let them swim around that fishbowl, they're like, man, this is kind of nice. I got a lot of room to move here. And that's where you can really develop an athlete. And not even you developing the athlete. Again, you're just giving them space to do so. And that's why I think it's so important to mention this stuff because we have gone, again, it's the pendulum I'm talking about in strength conditioning. It's like we've gone all the way to the smallest possible fishbowl. Like we're bringing these athletes
Yeah.
home in these plastic bags and keeping them in that plastic bag that you brought the fishbowl in. So you can have your hand around that plastic bag and you can have control over that plastic bag when you really just need to set them in that pond and let them go. And again, like when we feed koi back home at my dad's pond, literally all you do, dude, is you just throw out some goldfish pebbles. That's all you do. You just throw out goldfish pebble and they grow and they have beautiful lives and
Mm-hmm.
they live really, really long. But you don't feel as important as a coach when that's all you're doing. You're just throwing out pebbles out there. But you provided that environment for them to grow in. Otherwise, they're stuck at that pet store. Otherwise, they're stuck in that little small fish bag. And I really find that to be the beauty in what we do at JST, and I know it's what you do, and hopefully what we're trying to get across at this conference is allowing these athletes to
Yeah.
leave that little fish bag and letting the coaches just let the athletes swim in the big pond.
Yeah, I was going to say too, something that's non-anecdotal. It sprang in my head as you were talking was there's a really great research because it's like, well, what's your core point? Where do you start? And we talked about this. Is it prescription or is it play? And I mean, both are important. They work together. And like you mentioned, even like there is a level of rote repetition that can breed creativity. But there was a research study, and I wish if I could get my computer up and find it. Kevin Mulcahy just reposted it. Someone had posted this on Twitter, and as soon as I saw it, I was sending it to like Jeremy Frisch, because there was a study, and I should just post it to a link. If someone has it, put it in the comment box. But they found they worked with professional soccer players. I think it was Scotland or England, and it was defensive players. And they did a longitudinal study going back in time to say, all right, when did you start playing the sport? How many, years of practice did you have? All these things. And what they found is that the defining factor of who was the best, who had the highest skills versus the lower level or mediocre or whatever you could say, was the amount of time in free play growing up. That was the defining factor. How much free play did you get? And so it's like, it's funny because now, does that mean that when athletes come in the gym, it's just a giant free for all, right? Like that's kind of like what Rafe said. It's like, it'd be like giving someone a guitar with no, just say, hey, have at it, who doesn't know any notes or strings. Like, right, we need to set up a structure that can encourage play. Well, also too, I mean, even here in my neighborhood, like even part of the reason I moved to this neighborhood was I saw kids playing. Like it was like the first neighborhood that I had been to. I saw kids playing in the streets and in their yards, and it was so different. When I lived in Berkeley, California, you never saw anyone. I never saw kids playing in the streets ever, and so it's. I always think about this too. It's like, well, one, the whole system, you kind of hurting because you know the whole system needs to change, and kids just need more of this. Period. But then two, it's like, well, when we do practice, how can I respect the fact that the best skills are learned through free play, or at least a container that comes from And well, what's free play, right? Like why we say, well, why is free play so good? Well, it's autonomy, it's creativity. Like I mentioned earlier, it's the imprint of things that actually stick. What makes an imprint? Is it a coach saying do this, or is it all the experiences and all the joy and all the autonomy? And of course, when you free play too, it's like, hey, let's go play. I mean, you could do a lot of different things. Hey, it's house rules basketball, or Jeremy Frisch just talked about tackle basketball. There's a different rule of constraints in tackle basketball, right? But like there is some constraint. Hey, let's go play pickup soccer or baseball. There is a framework, but then within that framework, there's all the room for exploration and learning without someone who's dictating to you how to do it. But then I do think at some point in an athlete's career, okay, now we do need a level of structure. The question of where, when, and how does that come in, I think we're still working through. And there's also an art form to where, when, and how does that come in? And how do you start guiding that when it's time for it? But always going from that, okay, if it's free play that dictates who's the best, how can we make sure, as like a fractal, how can we make sure that that is guiding and as like an oversight to whatever sessions we do create?
Well, and he was the guy that asked the question, said he was looking for the goldfish pebbles. And I think like what you were saying is it is an art there. And we kind of talked about this on your podcast too, but there's this wide variety. I like using the quarterback as an example because it's like at first you have to create just like a general thrower of the football, right? Like a general thrower of something. Then you can, and that would be something like handball, right? Where they're throwing on the move, they're throwing off multiple platforms, they're doing all these things, they're seeing openings and gaps and getting the ball there, right? Then you have to get a little bit more specific and create a general thrower of the football, and that would be maybe like something as simple as catch, if you want to provide structure there. And then you have to do with a general like quarterback that understands like 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s, and tactical and technical understandings of the sport in and of itself. And that's where, so when you're looking for the goldfish pebbles, it's on that like spectrum of balancing out, allowing them to be general throwers of balls and being a high level QB with mastery of technical and tactical understandings of the sport, right? And I don't think it's just you reach a certain level and it's just here, right? Because I think a lot of people, they get to this point all the way over here and they have all these understandings, but they went so far away from just being a general thrower of the football that they get stuck in these like thought processes or stuck in bad patterns of throwing the football, or and a lot of it's psychological too. They're just so like, I need to put the ball here, and allowing them to come back just a little bit over here and just be a general thrower of balls again, like allowing themselves to breathe a little bit. And then we come back here and get them into a little bit more small sided games and working on specific weaknesses. Maybe they don't know how to read a certain zone coverage, or maybe they don't know how to get the ball out on like an out route. And then what you can do with all of this information too, again, maybe it's like they can't throw the ball on an out route because they don't have a big enough or strong enough arm, right? So then the general pebble would be, we got to bring them all the way back over to general throwers of like throwing the ball hard, and we got to get their arm strength up. But I think the pebbles, the goldfish pebbles that you give them, you let the sport dictate that. You let the activities that you're watching, the movement dictate that, and you ebb and flow back and forth, watching and getting the data points that they are giving you, right? And I think a lot of times we get lost in, he's just a bad quarterback, or he just can't do that aspect of it. It's like, well, let's look at the actual data points. Where is he struggling specifically in a 1v1 situation, okay? Why is he struggling in a 1v1 situation? Is it because he can't fit the ball into the gap? Then we go back to general thrower. Maybe, though, it's something as simple as he doesn't trust the wide receiver that he works with, right? Working on his arm strength over and over and over again is never going to fix that trust with that wide receiver that he has to throw the ball to because it's the only wide receiver that he's got, you know? So I think that's where the art of it comes into play, is just looking at what's in front of you and paying attention to what's in front of you rather than coming with this predetermined solution of his arm needs to be at this slot and he needs to throw the ball harder, right? I know plenty of quarterbacks and plenty of people that can throw the ball really, really hard, and they suck when they get on the football field. And coaches, they don't work with these athletes, right? It's just like, he's just not good. And that, to me, that's just not a very good solution to the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that ecological approach, and you have a lot more expertise with football. My world being track, just an anecdote there that I thought was really cool is Liz Gleadle is a Canadian javelin thrower. Eventually I looked to have her on the podcast, and she's very much into like kind of recapturing the art of movement within her javelin throwing. And so a cool drill she had, I think came from her softball background. And it's something I always struggle with is like, how do I get the rhythm of the last few steps in javelin? Because if you give me a baseball, no problem. It's hardwired. But as soon as it's a javelin, it's just like, and I think it was something where like she was picking up a javelin ball, which instead of a javelin, it's like a little ball that weighs the same, kind of like she was fielding a catch in softball and then going and throwing it into the net with that same rhythm. So recapturing that essence of play and being a general thrower and then like supersetting that with the javelin. I'm like, that is so cool. I mean, honestly, it'd be very similar, like, hey, we're going to go play basketball and do some dunks and then go do high jump or whatever. But I think being able to contrast something that's a little bit more finite with something that's a little more expansive or play oriented is really key. And I think it's key no matter what you're like, kind of like the fractal, right? If you're and that's too where, I mean, we could talk about this too. But like, the sports performance coach, sport, I think no matter what the distinction level is, there's always a fractal of one in the other. A part of one will always exist in the other thing. And sometimes I think too where this whole thing is going. I mean, I'm going to be talking about this in my presentation, like athletic performance then and now. It'd be interesting to think like, is it going to be just like this in 30 years or 50 years? And I guess, if it's like an AI, like if it's like some sort of AI dystopia, who knows, or whatever is going to happen with things. But I don't think it's going to be the same it is now in terms of the exact containers that exist, because I do think play changes that. And in some ways too, you almost could say, well, like a lot of it, if you're talking about injury resiliency and robustness, you could almost have like the tissue health coach and then the skills coach. You could even go to those containers of things. It's just interesting to think of. So, but that being said, I did want to ask you about COD. Like that's a question that I think is really good to cover, simply because to me that's the ultimate intersection, right? Because you have the cognitive approach, cut like this, these positions, versus the play-based approach. And to me, it seemed like all the coaches I know who don't teach COD steps are all people who coach youth sports for the most part. I don't know about every single person, but it seems like it's interesting to see that people who have gone through and see how children learn to move. But I'd be curious. I mean, I've done shows on this as well, like with people, debates and all this stuff. I'm curious your perspective on that. I think I already know what you're going to say, but yeah, at least your thoughts
Yeah.
on that one.
Yeah, I think you know my approach there, but again, you can kind of go with again, it can go to the same thing as the throwing. It's like, why do they struggle at change of direction? I would say 99% of athletes, they don't struggle with change of direction because they didn't get their foot in a certain spot, right?
Yeah.
It's they're not perceiving information, they're not confident in their abilities. But sometimes it is a force issue, right? They literally just can't make the cut. Or the other thing, it's like they're not fast enough to like it limits their field if they don't have high enough like max velo or acceleration to where if they do make a cut, like they know they can make the cut, but they're not going to score on it because their options are limited, because even if they do make that guy miss, that person's going to catch up, right? So that's where it all comes into this, again, hodgepodge of things of you need to do it all. It's not just free play and no training, and it's not just training and no free play. I really believe there's a very big and important balance there of why does that athlete not feel like they can do it, or why not even feel, why are they not scoring when they need to score, right? And breaking that down with that athlete and watching the data points in front of you. And again, a lot of it's just working on a lot of these general aspects, right? If they can make that person miss and then they're pretty shifty and they don't have that max velocity part of it, and so they make the person miss and they still get tackled and it wasn't super great, then we need to do some more max velo stuff. But a lot of it's just like they're not confident in making the person miss, and they don't have enough reps in making a person miss.
Yeah.
For most athletes, like when was the last time you actually worked on making somebody miss? In just a general setting. Maybe it was playground for a lot of these kids, but even like these high school kids that I have coming up, it's like they don't even have like it's crazy, man. Like they don't have PE. They don't like that's one of the things that I fight back on a lot with a lot of these coaches. Like, well, they had that growing up. They had this all taken care of. No, they don't. I promise you they don't. Like I have so many athletes that they don't have PE, they don't have recess, they don't do these things. And they need a lot of these general qualities to work on. And so let's work in some 1v1 situations. Like literally just give them a ball, have two athletes run through this tunnel and have a two-way go situation, and watching some of the points there. Maybe they're not able to change direction because they're not strong enough. And then we go do some weight room stuff, then we come back out. Not weight room stuff like superset it, but like just 3 week or 6 week strength training program. We bring them out. Now they're strong enough to make that cut that they wanted to make, and now they're making the person miss. Maybe it's like the strongest athlete in the world, and I put them on air, and they're making the cut beautifully. And when it gets with, they just don't have confidence in beating somebody. So maybe it's like putting them at an advantage a little bit, or putting them against somebody that's a lesser athlete or a lesser defender, and letting them beat that person and be like, oh, okay, next rep, I have a little bit more confidence. I can make this move. And then some of it's the creative solution too. It's like,
Mhm.
how can how can you make that defender miss as many ways as possible? Because a lot of athletes, they kind of have like set moves, right? It's a spin move, it's a double juke, it's like a step back type of thing. We understand you have those moves. Those moves are developed. How can we put you in an environment? Maybe it's like it's an angle where you can only juke. Like a spin move's not going to work in that setting. How can we put you
Mhm.
in an environment in which you're forced to kind of like, you can use the spin move, but you're going to get caught. Um, how can we
Yeah.
put you in an environment in which you have to work on a new move? And do you like that move? And a lot of times it's not even like, I want them to learn how to juke. It's like, maybe that move's just not for you, or maybe it was, and you found that out all by yourself by putting you in an environment like that. But I think starting with the general and a lot of these qualities, and then going to the specific. But I don't know an
Mhm.
athlete that doesn't know how to cut, and that's his issue. Like, doesn't know how to decel, and that's
Mhm.
why he's not making people miss. Like, I just don't know an athlete that is like that.
Yeah, I think that, and again, I think that I I definitely lean a lot more towards the, I guess, I don't know. I feel like if you're saying ecological, you're saying everything that's coaching COD is not, and it's somehow, super superior. And like I still haven't made my mind completely up. I also always want to double check. I'm like, am I just being lazy by saying that I don't think it works? You know what I'm saying? Like, because it's something less I have to worry about, right? In some way, shape, and form. But I think well, the one thing that really stands out to me is, well, a few things. And actually, I love what you said too about constraining different ways you can cut. But it's not like, as I've seen it, this is just my understanding. Yeah, like this is what I was going to say. What you said, like when people say an athlete doesn't know how to cut, because I see this in sprinting. People might say, "Oh, this athlete has like so much tail kick or something, and they sprint really bad." But then if you have them chase a person or chase even a tennis ball bouncing, the mechanics change. And now they may still have some things that are suboptimal or whatever. But by and large, as soon as you have a task to lock onto, things change, timing changes, everything changes because I think I like Frank Ferencich. He talks about the long body, meaning we aren't just us. We are an extension of everything, like our community, and even like the environment we're in. And I think that's how it works in sport. We lock on the long body to the task outside of us, and our body forms a solution to the best of its abilities. And so I think that my thought would be, I would be convinced that the COD work outside of the sport, outside of you could say in a more ecological practice. I don't say that to try to like be like, oh, you're in and you're out, but if someone showed me instantly in sport, like in perception and changing and locking on a task, how a canned COD task did change it instantly, and the athlete felt it, I'd be like, okay. I mean, or even give it a few months or something, right? Like, I don't know. But I will say, on the other hand, I've had athletes who cannot change direction very well because of what you said. It's a strength or mobility or range of motion deficit. Like I had a tennis player, the coaches were always like, man, this guy can't move laterally very well. Well, he's got crap internal rotation, like that whole like triangle legs thing, like Darian's talked about, like the ability to, or like Michael Jordan guarding Allen Iverson. This guy could not do that. But if I got him down in positions using a physio ball and encouraged that range, and he felt that range, he actually could, when we took the physio ball away, move better laterally to a perception, because it was like a strength thing, if that makes sense. So I feel like that is the gray zone maybe a little bit. And even maybe some of the COD stuff, you could say even just doing a pro agility, it builds strength in that COD. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's a complex layer of things for sure. But I would definitely lean more towards that. And that's why I think the youth sport coaches that I've talked about this don't believe in coaching COD directly, because they see very clearly all the decision making. That's like the top and most important layer by far. And then that technical piece is more or less just details. And sometimes I wonder too, I think if you're the person who, and as an athlete, and needs to be taught how to change directions, maybe you should be in a different sport. I know that's like lazy thinking, but you know what I'm saying? Like I'd be curious who couldn't change directions in a sport well and needed to be taught the technique, and suddenly they had this weapon and were amazing. You know what I'm saying? Like there's so many layers under decision making, perceiving, reactant, general abilities, and all
Well,
those things.
I
So, anyways, yeah.
Yeah, I should mention my first 3 to 4 years of strength conditioning when I started, dude. We all of our agility sessions. That's all we did. We did 2-step forwards cuts. We did 2-step laterals. We worked on like certain positions.
Just a minute.
You good?
Yeah, my son, Ian. Oh, it's a battery. You need to put that away, buddy.
He's got a bug
Yeah,
or what?
he's digging into batteries. Can you put that away, buddy? Put that back. My 5-year-old is digging
Oh no,
batteries
that's
out
going
of.
to be a live conference right
He's
here.
a little yeah. Oh, he's gonna be a good engineer someday because he explores my house and my toolkit way, way, way too much. Speaking of the ecological approach, sorry,
No,
sorry for the
no,
interruption.
no, 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 you're good. But that was my first like 4 years of doing this stuff, and myself, like, and I, the only reason I did it is because it's how I was like raised in the strength conditioning world. So we would do like 2-step side cut sticks, 2-step
Yeah,
forward decels, and we did all this stuff. And again, for the super neurotic athletes, like it was amazing and they mastered it, but it never helped them. It was just like confirming their
yeah,
bias of they need more instruction if they perfected it. It was like it felt really gross to me because it felt like I was selling them a lie. It's like they were getting better at that,
yeah,
never better at the sport, and they felt
yeah,
really good about getting better at the things that I was telling them they needed to get better at. And it was almost this kind of like false idol and this false hope I was giving them of if you just master this, you'll do that. And Michael Zwayful had an awesome video that really like Stu Bourne is one of my mentors at St. Thomas, and he sent me this video, and it was one of the like I was like, holy crap. And he was showing a video of an athlete running a 3-cone agility drill and like the position he got into to get to the 3-cone and come back by himself. And then they did the same thing, but as reactionary to where they chased the partner. And then like even the positions of when they were chasing the partner, same athlete, 1 rep apart, completely different because now they're reacting on something. I was like, wow, that's kind of that
yeah,
like that planted the seed of what is going on there? Like, well, what's kind of happening with some of this change of direction stuff? Like, we're doing all this pretty picture stuff, and then we get to the sport itself, and it's completely changing. And then I was hearing this argument, and I was holding on to the hope of the change of direction stuff, mostly for myself, because I'm like, dude, I
hmm
don't want to waste myself 4 years of coaching there and 4 years of my athletes running through these drills. And then I was sold on the thing of, well, we're working on decelerate, like we're working on force, like a
hmm
force drill. It's like, well, I can get all this force drill stuff done at a much higher quality in the weight room. And the mobility
yeah,
drills, like if I just focus on the extremes in the weight room of doing like high depth troughs, and doing like mobility stuff where I'm working on internal rotation of the hips separately, like I'm getting results much faster working on the free play stuff here. And the like, I just felt like it was a bunch of middle ground crap that I was kind of sold, and I was selling athletes this false hope of, well, it's
yeah,
if it's not position, well, then it's going to be a force thing. It's like, well, I can get a lot more like force development stuff done in the weight room. What are we talking about here? And switched over, and now we like the biggest thing. Now I'm not selling neurotic athletes false hopes, and I can get them out of being a neurotic athlete, which is so important because I was a neurotic athlete in that sense of like I was just if I was given an idol, like I was given something to chase, I would go chase it because a coach told me that was important, and I was telling these athletes it was important, and then watching it not work, and I just couldn't make that connection until I saw a bunch of videos and things like that. And that's where I really feel like stop focusing on that kind of middle ground stuff and just go to the extremes, go to where they're actually struggling, which is the cognitive side over here and the physical side over here. And I'm going to work on these two things kind of separately in the extreme aspect, and then let that sport kind of be that middle ground part where I'm watching the data points come into play. Okay, are they still struggling? Do I need to focus more on the cognitive side of things, or do I need to focus more on the
yeah,
physical side of things? And as I say, focus more on it. Again, it's a spectrum. It's not I just go free play or I just go weight room. It's that spectrum of what do they need more focus on, and talking to them about that thing. And I just felt like a lot of the change of direction drills was more that middle ground, not really moving the needle,
yeah,
kind of being more important for myself as a coach.
yeah. I do think there's a lot of, I won't say it's 100% this, but a lot of the body follows the mind and the body follows the perception with what it has to offer. And even like you said, you're selling athletes a false hope. I think it would actually be much better. I have nothing wrong with timing pro agilities because I think there's strength in it. You know, like it's not necessarily you're going to cut like this exactly in the game, but there's a strength piece. There's a little bit of a mobility piece that comes with getting better in that. I don't think you have to make it a main focus, and I like doing that stuff before even main linear sprinting and stuff as well. I think it's cool to combine in there. But I do think that I think we tend to dissociate things so much. And if you watch kids play, even just watching kids play soccer and develop, it's the decision that is so high in the totem pole, being able to process information. And then if you have a multilateral athletic background and you're reasonably athletic, the body will follow suit. It's even too, like, I know that perception is a leading role in a lot of ACL injuries. One of the coach of my daughter's team played NCAA D1 soccer, and she was totally fine all through high school with injuries, and then actually tore her ACL once, maybe twice in college. And we had talked about it a little bit. And one piece was just the game was so much faster. She's like, I couldn't react in time to this thing happening. And to make up for it, she basically got caught, probably legs like move in a different direction than they were supposed to. And she got caught off balance in a bad spot and tore ACL. And so I think we look at this so much, and there might have been some physical stuff as well. But we look at it so much only ever on the level of, it's like, because the container of strength and conditioning exists, it's almost all physical, right? But it's like, you can't separate the physical from the mental. You can't separate the physical from the cognitive. And that's why I say, like, I don't know if this thing will look the same in 30 to 50 years, barring some sort of dystopia or I don't know, whatever, whatever, the enhanced Olympics and maybe whatever's going on there. So it's an interesting area to look at, but I think it does feed into this whole like point of view of what's your starting point. Yeah, like what's square one for athletes and seeking improvement curves.
And why do you as a coach implement the methods that you implement? And that's a big part of my presentation and getting to a point, because this was a huge eye opener for me, myself. It's like I was implementing these drills. I was focused so much on the physical because it gave me a purpose to be a coach, because I could quantify everything. And that allowed me to feel important. It allowed me to feel like I was doing my job. And it's sometimes, and again, like it's not like that anxiety goes away. Like when we're doing some of this free play stuff and I understand what we're working on, and I've been in it a long time, it's still like, it's like, okay, like what's our metric? What, like that type of stuff. And I still track metrics and like still do that stuff just for my ape brain to feel like I'm doing a good job in some of these things. So it's like, why do we focus so much on the physical aspect? Is it actually because it improves the athlete's performance? Is it actually because we're decreasing injuries? All of these things, or is it because it's much simpler to put the blinders on from all of these things that are happening all around us and just say, no, big three, get their vertical up, get their change of direction stuff up, get their 40 times up, and then we did a good job. And to me, it doesn't need to be either or, and that like you can take your blinders off, still improve all of these like qualities, and that's why we track all of our metrics and do it just to show coaches that it's still doable. It's not like you stop getting stimulus done. It's not like you stop getting these athletes bigger, faster, stronger, but you can take off your blinders and stop keeping them in that little fish pond or fish bowl.
Yeah. I do think the data, it does, there's not there's not an absolution of data collection. It's in terms of good data, like actionable data and nothing, like workloads and those things that I think are certainly helpful, but it's almost like a middle ground. Like I said, I hate to make these buckets, but this is just one place it could go. Like, let's just say 30 years, it could go a variety of directions. If you had like a tissue health coach, like isometrics, Achilles, tendon scans, workloads and all that stuff. And then you have the sport coach, and what's in the middle, right? Like, in some sense, it's actually play and exploration. It's almost, that's almost like a linchpin in the middle. And I just think it's worthy of exploring. And I think in the container that sports performance is in currently, well, when you can use play and exploration and aliveness to get people's fly times flying and better, their jumps better, you've shown the power of something. And when you understand that deeply, you can take it into sports skills. And that's why it's fun for me, like working with sports on a low level right now, like team sports on a low level, being a track coach, because it's a great place to start with that. And then you can move up the chain as you go. But I just think this whole thing is a lot more expansive than just just strength coach, just speed coach, just skill coach. In some way, there's almost your own, superhero way of combining these things. I wanted to see if there was any other questions recently too. I did say there was a funny question that I thought was pretty good. It was something about how much skill does it take to hit a softball thrown at 5 miles an hour?
Yeah, we
I think
got
that
to,
was one
okay,
of your
that's Proc, so we got to go off on the full rant here. I was going to chirp him for a second.
maybe there is a lot.
Proc is an ultra
Aggressive.
runner. Like he runs. Like Proc, we can't be saying what's the skill there when you just put on your shoes and you go and run, bro. What's the skill there? What are we talking about there? But that's he's one of our OG athletes. Proc and Dowdle are one of our OG athletes. But I saw all of their shirts. So I'm like, I've got the whole live stream now.
Yeah, yeah, those are pretty good. Let's see. I'm trying to look at a few others here. If there's not a bunch of new ones, maybe we can get this closed down in a little bit.
There was
Um, I'm
one
sure
up
there's a
here.
few.
Hold up. Does Olympic lifting confirm a bias, or does it actually improve performance in, say, jumping for trained athletes? If you want to touch on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, just because I think that's one of those things that, like okay, I talked about the different layers that go into anything. I think you can look at Olympic lifting as only the exercise layer. That's it. And if you're looking at it only the exercise layer, there's athletes who do it well and there's athletes who do it poorly. I mean, I remember when I was at Wilmington College, the football coaches there were running the strength program, which it is funny because I think sometimes we can take an approach to strength and conditioning like there's definitely a place for good strength and conditioning in a lot of places because there's a lot of people like I mean it was so bad there. Like they had people breaking their backs on the first day, like max out on squats first day, and then they had like 1,000 pound club t-shirts and their hang cleans was like standing hang clean, bounce it off your thighs 3 times and do the splits and catch it. Now, if that's kind of how you teach the Olympic lifts, then I would not assume a good transfer to your abilities. In fact, there was someone who cleaned like 330 like that who had like a 19-inch vertical in the just jump, so if that's your corollary, that's pretty bad. But where I'm going with this is like, okay, we have the layers to COD. You have the perceptive, you have decision making, perceiving your environment, and then the general capabilities of the body. And then finally, you could get into the patterning. But for Olympic lifting, there's also a cultural piece. And I think people don't like the long body, like with Frank Forencich. And look, there's a lot of ways to get things done. But as I've seen it with things like track and field jumps, track and field throws, it's just an important cultural piece. And it does fit with the relative force profile, as long as they're done decently well in production of those events. That being said, I mean, I have had a little bit of a mixed bag. I will say I do have Olympic lifting in the majority, not all, but a lot of my programs. But it's a little more conservative. It's rarely done over 80%. I kind of try to treat it like a medicine ball throw. I use it to stimulate, like you said, cultural. If something's culturally important, it also is stimulating. And if it's stimulating, you can pair it to something that's like bouncy or explosive. Pair it with a medicine ball throw. Pair it with bounds. Pair it with bound combos. Pair it with accelerations. Where I've moved towards it is a little bit more there, but I don't use it for every single athlete. I think that I've had swimmers who love it. I mean, Caleb, if you look at like Florida athletics, NCAA, their strength coach uses them a lot. Caleb Dressel, who just set just unbelievable sprint swimming records, like a 50 free record that would be like someone running 9.4 in the 100, like that good. That guy could clean like 335 off blocks. I mean, there's so many anecdotes of people who they feels good. It feels like in their wheelhouse. They use it. But at the same time, I think there's other great alternatives that if we lived in a world without Olympic lifting, all the records would probably be the same because we'd find other things to do that are culturally meaningful and cool. But I do think there's something that's really cool about throwing and catching weights that is just cool. It's stimulating for the sake of that, and then you can use that to stimulate other things. But as soon as it becomes like that football team bouncing 315 off your thighs and having a 19-inch vertical, you have to ask yourself, well, there's probably something that's more stimulating for that group. So I would just for me, I look at the cultural piece too. I just think people can take a really elitist view on either side very, very easily. And I just think there's always other things to consider in the exact answer. But if for me, you said I could have them or I couldn't have them in my program, totally fine either way. Give me something to work with. I would find if you said you have to use an Olympic list, I'm going to find a way to make it amazing. If you say you can't, I'm going to find a way to make that amazing. And I think I think it should be like that for any tool. If all I have is sandbags in my program, I'm going to make that amazing, just like the Olympic lifts. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think we sell ourselves short in our ability to use tools and craft them and all the surrounding exercises to make art. And that doesn't get talked about in that conversation, but that's something that I think is valuable to look at with
Yeah,
that.
and like you said, I think the biggest thing using that tool for the interest level and when it's there, because that's where it's
Hmm.
like Olympic lifts were killed for me for the longest time because it's just like it was promised as it wasn't promised as a force production tool. It wasn't promised as like it'll get you stronger. It was promised as if you get good at these, you'll get really good at sports. And I got really good at Olympic lifts, and I was
Nice.
freaking terrible at sports, and I saw that disconnect, so
Yeah.
I swore off Olympic lifts. Now I do Olympic lifts because I want to learn how to snatch it, and they're interesting to me right now. So I give a lot
Yeah.
of intent to them, and I give way more intent to those than squatting right now, just because I'm not super interested in squatting. And I talked about this yesterday in the YouTube video I was doing, but it's like I was doing these 360 plyometric push-ups. So I was pushing up, hit a 360 land. And I was talking about how a lot of coaches, like these robotic coaches, will be like, well, the super cat is the best plyometric thing for the upper body because you can progressively overload it over and
Hmm.
over again. And I was like, that's true. We love the supercat. It's an amazing thing for the upper body with the plyometrics that we do and a lot of throws that you can do with it. But athletes get bored as shit with it after 3 or 4 weeks, man. And then
Yeah.
like week 3 or week 4 of the supercat we're doing, it's about 40% the intensity as when I first put those in. Like that no longer is a great
Hmm.
tool for
Yeah.
me. And I put in these twists, or let's say for the Olympic lifts, I do maybe it's just a hex bar jump or a super cat jump that week, or
Yeah.
a depth drop, whatever it is for that week of like a high force jump, whatever, a vertical. I'm blanking on where I was going with that, but the ability to just have that interest level high by just like slight twist and not promising things that it's
Yeah.
not. And then you can go back to the Olympic lifts or go back to the super cats for the upper body plyometrics, and you get insane outputs again because it's interesting for that athlete
Yeah.
again, right? So I think that's a big part of it. It's not throwing out the tools and not promising things that the tools just cannot provide. That's why it's so easy to make fun of tib raises or knees over toes lunges. It's like it's not the tib raise that is bad. It's not the knee over toes that is bad. It's the promise and story
Yeah.
around these things. It's like you can do that exercise and
Yeah.
get good results or get a stimulus out of it, whatever you want to say. But the promise that it makes an athlete an amazing athlete is the athlete's going to realize that's not true in 12 weeks. And then they're going to blame the exercise rather than the practitioner that sold them the lie
Yeah.
around the exercise, which is what Olympic lifts were for me. It's like, I got to a very high level with them, and I was just like, then I'm like, these are BS. It's not the Olympic lifts that were BS at all. It was the story around the Olympic lifts that were told to me that were the BS. And I don't believe in
Yeah.
doing that to the athletes. Like, I just think we can do it in a much more truthful way and get a lot better results doing it that way.
Yeah. I agree. I think that in some ways, I think it also pairs and fits with a sport in that way. Because like you were said, you were promised that you were going to do these and it was going to help your sport. I think the best match for the Olympic lifts is kinesthetic power sports. So like shot put, discus. I mean, you were line in football, so I mean there is that, but there's a little bit more decision making, or a lot more decision making in playing the line in football, like short sprints and things like that. I mean, and even I wouldn't say probably 400 is probably where I draw the line with any of the Olympic lifting. But I think there's a specific, if you have these like, and I made that bar chart a while ago, and what's the best fit for that? And it's kind of like, well, Kevin Mulcahy had talked about on the podcast recently. He said athletes who grow up with a lot of free play and they grew up and that's their MO, they actually don't love weightlifting because it's like it almost doesn't fit with what they learned in the streets. It's very rudiment and it locks down their degrees of freedom and all these things. And I do think there's a thing where if your sport is just defined by decision and skill and all that, I do think there is an efficiency point and like, oh well, maybe we don't need to spend the time with Olympic lifting. Maybe we can spend, I mean, no one does this, but let's spend 10, 20 minutes less in the weight room and just do the basics and basic easy stuff and then go do your sport. But I mean, it is kind of interesting. It's like because the schedule exists, you will fill this hour with, whatever. But I do think something you had said that I think is cool with the Olympic lifts, and it's cool with like a super cat or something that you do like every week. Like when I was at Cal training those athletes, like swimmers, sprint swimmers for power, we did Kaiser, kind of like a super cat, Kaiser jumpers for power. We only tested biweekly because if it's every week, that curve starts to sink sooner. And so by extending out when you do get that singular raw force piece, then it does make it more special. And you could fill that in, you could backfill that with, yeah, some more problem solving stuff. Like Bill Boomer, the swim coach, had said there's cats and dogs, and with athletes, there's, these archetypes, and there's cats who like to solve problems. And I thought, ooh, like if I'm a speed and power type and I like to solve problems, the Olympic lifts is actually really good if it's meant for problem solving, which means actually as soon as it becomes too much about a 1 rep max, it's not about the problem solving as much. And so a lot of my implementation is different types of catches, split snatches, just doing it differently and making it more about the coordination and the speed. And honestly, people would say this is heresy, but I'll do reps of 5, 6, maybe I haven't done 8s yet, but I did 3 sets of 10 power cleans. And I didn't choose a set rep scheme. My coach put it in. My best year at track and field, and my clean actually sucked. My max sucked. I was like maybe 30 pounds less than the year prior. But it's almost like just doing something that's problem solving and the high rep of problem solving, and there was a little capacity to it, and it was general, so who cares? I don't know. It almost just gave me more capacity to do the specific jumping and sprinting I needed to do in a way. And I'm such a pure bounce athlete type. If I was a more wide ISA power type, maybe a higher clean max would have carried me further. But it's almost like my clean max before it came too much about the clean and not enough about the coordination within the clean was maybe about 225, to be honest, which is so low because it's been way higher in my life other times, and I've been not bouncy and athletic. So it's almost like there's a limit for some of these weight movements that below that limit, it's just like above the limit, it's too much about the force of the lift, and it needs to be this sweet spot where it's expression, it's coordination, it's velocity, it's all those things. So that's probably getting that's more confusing and more complicated than I would ever get with an athletic group. But yeah, that's I think the coordination piece within that is highly underrated. People don't talk about that as readily as they would just want to slap bar speed monitors on the Olympic lifts and things like that. And if I'm going to measure something, I'd probably rather spend time measuring other things, you know.
And one of the things there too, when I was at the college level, we got jump mats in, and we were killing it on the jump mats, and all of our program was working, and it was like a 12-week, like we were just rising on these jump mats, everything was going great. And then we went through like a probably like 4 or 5 week period where like we were stalling on our jump mats and everything was going down. And I was like freaking out over my program, like what was going on, all this issue. And then our jump mat broke for a week. Jump mat broke, so we didn't have the jump mat. And we were testing every single week. And we came back the next week with the jump mat. And we still did jumps that week. It wasn't like it was a deload week. I think it was a hurdle or something crazy. Brought back the jump mat next week, and they were all hyped up to use it, and almost everybody PR'd. I was like, oh, they were just sick as shit of the jump mat. Like, they were bored with it. It was super fun for them to do at the start, and then it got really boring. And that's the thing with the gamification method. At some point, the athletes just get bored of the game, and then it's like a weird, like, the metrics really aren't the metrics. It's like they just don't care anymore about the jump mat, and you just got to give them a break. So that's something that we do a lot. Like, I'll take away sensors on our lasers for 3 or 4 weeks whenever I notice like things are starting to plateau. We come back to it, and within a week or two, sometimes it takes 2 weeks of sprints just because I think they have to get the form down of sprinting through the lasers, which is different than chasing. But by week 2, almost everybody hits a new PR, and then we're kind of steady on those high marks again, and then we'll take the lasers away again. But again, I think the philosophy of being able to allow yourself to take away the laser, allow yourself to take away the jump mat, the tools that we value so much in the thing, just to make it interesting again for the athletes, man, that's way more powerful than a lot of people respect.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like I said, with the perception and decision making and those layers dictating the solution of the movement solution of the athlete and change of direction. I think that with overtraining, it starts in the mind. It's like Chinese medicine. They talk about like they have the 3 stages of when something actually manifests as disease, and it's like it's like energetic or something first before you see it. But I feel like overtraining starts in the mind before you see it in the body, as boredom, as disinterest. But I look at it almost the whole thing. I almost look at as boredom and then a withholding as well, or almost like you overtrain because you actually get too much of what you want in a short time period, if that makes sense. It's like test. Or I see this in high school track and field and high jump. They jump so many times, or it's like basketball and track. Like you do basketball, and then these people will roll off of the basketball court, jump really, really well, and then they just keep doing the same thing over and over again, and they start losing their spring. But so a lot of it, and that's why I like even extreme ISO holds. I love it because it's a withholding from something you want to do. I make people do it before the workout because it's a withholding. You have to practice a level of keeping yourself from that thing you want to do. And so that's why I'll test things every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. Like mid-thigh pull, I test every 2 weeks because or RFD on mid-thigh pull. You're going to see that it's just so much more interesting if you know you're not going to see it again for 2 or 3 weeks. That doesn't mean everything in your program has to be that way. For me, the most potent, powerful things you get less often because you don't get bored of them. You're more excited for them. You're more interested for them. And some of the more, medium, you could say middle of the road, consistent things can be in there more often. Or even like you said, all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, some of the high repetition rote things that you just do, you pick up the bar, you pick up the ball, and you just do it. And that creative solution can emerge. But I think that's important. And it kind of goes back to link everything together in a way with what we said. And I'm sure you could apply that to sports in a way as well, with and again, you have more experience with the team sport and insight there with me, but maybe particular plays and setups and things you do in practice. I think it can kind of resonate out to different places.
I was going to bring out some specific sport things there too. One of the things in softball that's hilarious is all softball bats are tested at the same exact threshold. Like all softball bats are the same exact, like they have to be. To be a legal bat, they have to be the same thing. And I've seen so many dudes buy a new bat and then hit brand new PRs on the exit velo or brand new distance PRs. And they're like, oh my God, my bat is brand, like, it's amazing. It's like, dude, they're all the same bat. Like, it's just the difference, like, ooh, I got a new toy. But that really got me thinking back to throwing. It's like we'd get a new hammer or we'd throw a lighter hammer or a heavy hammer. And it's just like throwing was fun again because it wasn't just running my face into the wall of doing the same thing. Because I know I know exactly where I'm going to, like, it's like this self-limiting belief of I know I throw 57 meters, right? I know exactly what this throw is going to be over and over and over again. And at some points, and then this is where it's like, oh, you can use that as a coach. You can give them new shot. This is where it's like part of giving them new shiny toys to like play around with and use to break through some of those things, to get out of some of those self-limiting factors and reach that new level, get that aha moment, whether it is true or not. Like I've seen just so many people just get a new bat. It's like that bat's the same exact bat as your other bat, and now you're hitting a brand new PR. Like that's such a psychological thing. But then I bring myself back to like throwing, and I was the same exact way with throwing.
Yeah, it's like then Paul Cater's got some really good like stuff on that workout vibe. It's like new shoes. Oh man, that new shoes vibe, or even in track. If I had new high jump spikes, man, like it's the best. And I think we don't even. You think that, I mean, that could even go as deep as like, even like little wristbands for winning something or like a new t-shirt or something like that people wear or whatever that has something to do with the gym or the facility. I mean, the Russian powerlifting coaches would say just to change the shoes to break through plateaus. And it's like, was it the actual, I'm sure it's the angle of the feet, but it's also like, new shoes, experiencing this thing in a little different way, novelty. So, I think we probably need to start winding this down at some point here. I saw some other comment that made me laugh, but I think it's the same guy that has been trolling you a little bit. Something about what is a citrus goat? What's a citrus ghost?
Oh, I was gonna bring. Hold up, 1 second.
Like an energy drink. Is that an energy drink? I think I've seen these things.
Is the citrus or the nectar of the gods right here. Citrus Ghost.
Oh man,
my 2024
am I too old for
Citrus Ghost? And Proc set us up nicely for that.
Yeah, is that withholding? I think it's how long can you hold an ISO without opening the Citrus Ghost?
0 seconds. I'm strictly fueled by Ghost at this point. I will have a Citrus Ghost.
Awesome. I'll have them lined up for you. We'll have them.
We'll just have a whole table of them.
I love it. Well, hey, everyone tuning in, I hope to see you June 8th in Cincinnati, Ohio. Obviously, I know there's some people that's going to be a very, very far trip. But for everyone in the Midwest, you have no excuse. So I hope to see you guys there. I'm sure we'll have a lot of good stuff on social media here as the conference unfolds. Austin, you want to say anything about that before we take off for the day? I know the early bird expires today, too. So the early bird expires today, too, for people tuning in today.
That was the other big question. I wrote it down. I just remembered to say it. They were asking about the online presence of watching the conference. Strictly in person? Are we doing online streaming? What's kind of thought process there?
Yeah. Have some people asking. Haven't made like the exact decision for that yet, but I will look to in a couple weeks here for that one. I know there's people probably on the edge. If you're on the edge and travel is super hard for you, I want this to be in person, but I also respect people who have other commitments or it's just like, it's like 3,000 miles away. I totally understand that. So if you're someone who that's an issue for you, send me a message because I also want to see how many people want the video. If we do it, we're going to do it really well too, by the way. Not like rinky dink. It'll be like quality audio and video so people get that experience. But I'm also trying to weigh that. So if you are interested in that, hit me up, send me a message, let me know you're interested, and we'll get that figured out. But right now it's just live and in person. It's you're only there if you're there. But I'm weighing
We'll
that
make
out
them
right now.
prove. We'll make them send like a distance chart of how far away they are from us, and if it's not a certain distance, they have to come in person.
Yeah. Yeah, or you have to video yourself drinking a certain amount of citrus ghosts in a certain time frame, and then
Be
you can
able
have
to do
access to
it.
it. Yeah, yeah. So, all right, yeah, my son's calling me again, so I should probably. Ian, did you get any more bad? Are those my credit cards? Oh, those are gift cards. It's been credit cards. Anyways, I should probably get off here. But it's great talking here, Austin. I'm glad we can make this happen. So we will see you soon, and yeah, we're tuning in. I hope to see you at
Yeah,
the
this is
conference.
awesome. Thank you.
All right.